I remember the routine well, rising to the alarm at 5:30, showering and dressing quietly so as not to wake Kate and the kids, eating a quick breakfast or taking it with me in the car, making my way to my office in a downtown skyscraper, returning after dark. Like many of you, for months of the year, I saw daylight at home only on the weekends. As Unitarian Universalists, most of us know intellectually that we humans are but one form of animate life on the planet, that our purpose is not to dominate and subjugate, that, as our seventh principle states, we are a part of the vast, interconnected web of creation. But that's easy to forget and hard sometimes to feel in the everyday course of our lives. Busy urban places don't allow for much contact with the natural world, which is why many of us are here in Marin. That lack of contact can be alienating. We become alienated from other humans and from the rest of creation. Environmental degradation flows in part from this sort of alienation, I believe. It's been more than 20 years since I lived that harried commuting routine. My life is more leisurely, relaxed. I wake later with the sun, putter in the kitchen, make coffee. I take my turn walking the dog, a real pleasure. Sometimes on those walks, I have found myself lost in a mental world, unaware of my surroundings, thinking about some issue or problem, planning, calculating, imagining, weighing. In teaching mindfulness, Thich Nhat Hanh, the Vietnamese Buddhist monk, advised young monks to be aware of where they are and what they are doing, walking a path into a village, for example. In so doing, they can call themselves constantly back to the present. If we are so mindful, he says, walking the path to the village or walking the dogs around the neighborhood, then, in his words, we will consider the act of each step we take as an infinite wonder, and a joy will open our hearts like a flower, enabling us to enter the world of reality. Enabling us to enter the world of reality. It is the songs of birds that call me back to the earth, to presence, to awareness of the beauty of the earth, to wonder and awe. Aha, I say, here I am, and isn't it beautiful? I attend. I hear my friends, identify them, a chestnut-backed chickadee, an oak titmouse, a California towhee, a Wilson's warbler, a black phoebe, an acorn woodpecker, and I am reconnected. Birds have had that effect on me for more than 60 years, since my first summer at a boys' camp on the coast of Maine when I was just 10 years old. As far back as I can remember, I've been fascinated by the natural world. Growing up in a small, semi-rural town in north-central Massachusetts, I spent my childhood exploring forest and field, swamp and stream, as Meriwether Lewis or William Clark, building rafts of logs and boards to pole on the pond across the street from our house, discovering new and exciting creatures on every excursion: salamanders, frogs, snakes, fish. But at the summer camp in Maine, I met a man who channeled that curiosity and love, Rennie Little, a young man not long out of Harvard College, a school teacher, eager to share his own love of the natural world with the next generation, including his love of birds. His enthusiasm fed mine, and I soaked up his knowledge of birds as fast as he could impart it. The Maine woods are full of birds in the summer, many of them migrants from warmer climes. I began to notice their differences, to begin to identify them, to begin to learn their habitats and their songs. The warblers with their flashes of red, green, blue, yellow, orange. The tiny, elusive winter wrens, a cousin of the Pacific wren here. seldom seen in the tangled undergrowth, but sure to be heard with their long, loud, intricate trills that fill the forest. The shy thrushes, a number of similar species, the veery, the wood thrush, and yes, the hermit thrush with its melodic, hauntingly beautiful flute-like song. I carried this interest with me to high school, where I found another avid birder, a biology teacher, Neil Curry, who carted me and my friends all over Connecticut and parts of Massachusetts, New York, and New Jersey on countless afternoons and weekends in search of birds. In the early years, birding was like stamp collecting for me. It was about numbers, creating and adding to what birders call a life list. It's about checking them off, accumulating and acquiring. It's about both quantity and quality, seeing more birds and seeing better birds, rarer, more colorful, more interesting, more elusive. It's about the hunt. The great Supreme Court Justice William O. Douglas was a lover of nature and a driving force in the environmental movement. I came to know of him through his books, My Wilderness and A Wilderness Bill of Rights, which helped to build support for the Wilderness Act of 1964. I remember him writing that one can't truly know an organism, a bird, a tree, a flower, without knowing its name. And for many years, I subscribed to that view. I wanted to learn and remember the names of the creatures I saw and to recognize them when I saw them again. And I still do. But perhaps there's a different kind of knowing, other than literal academic knowing, a spiritual knowing, a kind of a recognition that is different from, deeper than, identification, pigeonholing, a knowing like that of the late Trappist monk Thomas Merton. He was intimately aware of the birds at his home, the Abbey of Gethsemane in Kentucky. In his book, A Search for Solitude, he writes of the enjoyment of watching the migrant warblers come through on their way north in the spring, of the difficulty of identifying them, of the mystical place they took him with their beauty, of the closeness to God and the creation he felt in their presence. And he quotes his friend and mentor, Mark Van Doren, the poet and scholar, as saying, "The birds don't know they have names, Thomas." Merton goes on, he says, "Watching them, I thought, who cares what they are called? But do I have the courage not to care? Why not be like Adam in a new world of my own and call them by my own names?" That would still mean, however, that I thought the names were important. No name and no word to identify the beauty and the reality of those birds today is the gift of God to me in letting me see them. Merton seems to be telling us that the name obscures the reality of the bird and prevents us from truly knowing it, just as the name God obscures the essence, the spirit that it represents. I like to think that in my later years I've been less obsessed with the names, more comfortable with simply seeing the birds and absorbing the beauty of their being. It's the difference between having and being that the famous psychologist, psychoanalyst, and thinker Erich Fromm describes so eloquently in his book, To Have or to Be. What is it about birds that captivated Merton and captivates so many of us? Part of it certainly is simply that they fly, that they present themselves to us in a way that other life forms don't, like the mammals that spend the daylight hours hiding from us. In drawing our attention to them, birds draw our attention to the miracle of life, its beauty, variety of form and function, fragility, strength, resilience, spirit, in a dramatic way. And for me, birds stand as symbols of the niches they occupy. Finding them in a niche tells me that I'm in that place, announces the place. The song of the black-throated green warbler, its high-pitched zoo-zee, zoo-zoo-zee, says to me, You are here in the northern coniferous forest. It brings the place alive for me. Many images come to mind when I consider birds in this way. Matinicus Rock, a tiny treeless island 20 miles off the coast of Maine, the site of a granite lighthouse built in 1848. I was an 11-year-old camper, lying on the ground, reaching my scrawny little arm as far as I could into the burrows of Leach's storm petrels, small black seabirds about the size of bluebirds, to pull them out, if I could, so that our leaders could ban them. Sometimes I grabbed a petrel, sometimes it grabbed my finger. But almost every time I presented a bird for banding. They're only on the island during the breeding season and stay in their burrows during the day to avoid predators. All the while, Arctic terns, who nest on the surface in depressions between rocks or little tufts of grass, called shrilly above us, protecting their offspring. And Atlantic puffins, with their large multicolored beaks, flew in from the sea to their nests in the rocks with mouths full of little red eels for their babies. 3 years later, in September of 1963, walking a mile or so up the Appalachian Trail from the headquarters of the Hawk Mountain Sanctuary in Pennsylvania to the crest of the great Kittatinny Ridge, which runs hundreds of miles northeasterly across the state from western Maryland to to New Jersey. And sitting there on a rocky outcropping with other birders to see thousands of hawks migrating down the ridge as they made their way from the forests of Canada and the northern U.S. to their winter homes in Central and South America. On bright, late summer days like that one, the sun warms the air on the flat farmland below the ridge. The air rises, becoming thermals that support the birds on what becomes their long glide to the tropics. We watched in amazement as they flew over us, often circling in large groups in these thermals to gain altitude, then breaking off and streaming southwest along the ridgeline when they'd gotten high enough. Stepping out onto the back porch in Atlanta on a bright, clear Thanksgiving day 30-some years ago, to hear a sound not unlike that of Canada geese high overhead, and craning my neck to see large flocks of what turned out to be migrating sandhill cranes, some in the classic V formation speeding south, others circling like the hawks at Hawk Mountain to gain altitude for another long glide. For years afterward, I would see the first such migrating flocks of the fall on Thanksgiving Day, a special treat. Walking the magnificent beach at Hunting Island State Park in Beaufort County, South Carolina with Kate, spotting a tiny shorebird hatchling, a sand-colored golf ball with legs, or a male least tern wooing a female with a little silver herring, or a massive flock of red knots, thousands, robin-sized shorebirds feeding furiously at the waterline, fattening up for the last leg of their 12,000-mile migration from Patagonia to the Arctic, where they breed. And here in Marin, soaking in the glory of the bird life in our own little valley daily, at the wetlands just down the road, or at the beach. But one very old and seemingly insignificant memory stands out: the summer of 1960, standing in a field with the man who introduced me to birds and hearing him repeat the flight call of a bird flying overhead just then. "Potato chips, potato chips, potato chips," he said. "That's a goldfinch." I looked up and saw the goldfinch. Suddenly, birds had voices and I could learn them. My world had changed. And wouldn't you know, when I shared this story a few years ago at the 100th anniversary celebration of the camp's founding, outdoors under magnificent tall pines, a goldfinch flew over, announcing itself, and I turned to that same man. then in his 80s, and said, "Hear that, Rennie? Potato chips, potato chips, potato chips." That was a gift. Other animals speak, some in voices that are every bit as captivating and musical as birds, some insects, katydids, crickets, frogs and toads. But when I think of natural song, I think of birds. A male bird's song says to a female, "I'm over here, come find me." To another male, it says, "Stay away, this is my space." The prevailing view of ornithologists is, or has been, that birds sing for these reasons: to attract, to repel, to warn. I understand this. But I've always imagined that birds also sing for the pure joy of living. I'm never surprised when I walk outdoors at dawn on a particularly beautiful morning to hear the air filled with birdsong. I hear them saying, "It's a beautiful morning. I think I'll stay outside for a while and smile, just taking the clean, fresh air in." If you're old enough, you recognize that Rascals song from 1968. I checked it out this morning. It made number 3. The great 20th century Unitarian philosopher and theologian Charles Hartshorne enthusiastically supported this idea, and that's not surprising to me, for his childhood was eerily like mine. Son of a minister, sent off to boarding school in the countryside, Pennsylvania for him, northwestern Connecticut for me. He writes, "During a Christmas vacation in 1912, I saw and bought a copy of the first convenient bird guide. Returning to school, which was admirable for birding, being small and in the country with nothing but fields, woods, and streams for miles around, I began to learn the small land birds of eastern Pennsylvania, and in a few years knew them fairly completely." But unlike me, Hartshorne began to study and write as a philosopher in a small branch of biology, the study of singing birds. And in 1973, he published a monumental work called Born to Sing. Hartshorne's thesis that birds sing in joy is a direct extension of his theology, I believe. The idea that the divine both surrounds and infuses us, flows through us, enlarges us with its presence, delighting us as it lures us with its divine aims. In moments of awareness, we express that delight, he would say. We smile in wonder. The birds sing for joy. The Christian mystics call it the Christ mystery, the idea that matter and spirit are united in all of creation throughout the universe, that so united matter and spirit reveal and expose one another in their words, that in effect everything is holy, that the whole and every aspect of it is holy. Jesus is for them, in the words of Father Richard Rohr, a concrete personification in time of what has always been true, the unity of matter and spirit. The spirit of life infuses everything. Our theological ancestors said, as many say today, that God infuses everything. We feel it. We see it in others, and we see it all around us in the rest of creation if we are paying attention, as Thich Nhat Hanh urges us to do. The singing bird exudes spirit, proclaims the spirit of life, is a living testament to the unity of matter and spirit in as pure and simple a way as I can imagine. And fortunately for us, that enunciation of the spirit is almost everywhere. Musicians tell us that music is ultimately an expression of the spirit of love and life. So it is with the music of birds. When we are lost in our own individual worlds, encased in cocoons of sorts, or marooned on isolated islands, we have lost our connection with the rest of creation, and with it, the joy and peace that accompany it. We have lost connection with spirit, the spirit of life. But opening our eyes, our senses, our eyes and ears and nostrils and fingertips to the glory of the created world can bring us back, reestablish our connection, reveal our interrelatedness, and remind us that there is more strength, happiness, life, and wholeness in interdependence and unity than in independence and isolation and the alienation that accompanies it. The songs of the birds may have their utilitarian purposes, but it's hard to deny that they also ring of the spirit of life. They shake me out of my head, out of my isolation, return me to the earth, rekindling the spirit in me and restoring my soul, as the psalmist says, reconnecting me. How much harder it would be to feel that connection in a silent spring, a world without birds. I am grateful that I live in a world with wings. May it be so.